This is a national title roster right now, and by all accounts, their performance in fall camp is living up to the billing. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Happy to have you with us here today. We continue on with Camp Confidential. We're going to dive into the weeds, into the whispers about what's going on at 8 new programs today. Some big picture topics, some storylines, maybe an injury or two that we have to address because it could very much affect the outlook for some of the teams that we'll describe. And then there's this big picture conversation that we want to have about the current state of eligibility in college football, because it is chaos right now. Because there's, for example, a player at Notre Dame that is legally allowed to play this season. A federal judge said that he could, but he's not practicing right now. He's not in the building, and it's Junior Tuihalamaka. He's sitting out this season. They won in court because Notre Dame is afraid of what could happen if a different court decides to change their mind and potentially overrule what the original court had ruled out. And then you look just a couple 100 miles to the west, Indiana, they just got back 2 players under the exact same ruling, put them straight on the practice field, right? Same court order, same week, same state, by the way, opposite directions, opposite ways of handling exactly what the eligibility saga is. And this is exactly where college football is in the 3rd week of August. We also have 8 programs that we're going to dive into, and nobody really knows how to rule on this injunction. So we're going to go inside. We've got a quarterback who spent the spring throwing to the first receiver he saw, regardless of who was open, and spent Saturday making a huge jump in what he's capable of. We got coordinators that threw both arms to the sky, essentially thanking everybody about the quarterback room that he now has right in front of him. We got a team that ran 170 plays at night in their own stadium, tackled on half of them. So we have a bunch of things that we're going to dive into, but we have to start with the eligibility saga that is going on right now in the sport that we love so much, because it's wild. It's insane. And I think a lot of you might not even know about it, because I didn't even know that much about it either, to be honest with you. But it's becoming more and more of a reality, and it might become even more of a reality once NFL camps start to make their final cuts. So this is always college football. We're glad that you're with us. Go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get the podcast, doesn't matter where. Tell your friends too. Tell your friends word of mouth. We don't have like a marketing budget, so word of mouth helps. Tell your friends that we're covering college football, and we're covering it the right way. Also, check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. So let's kick things off with what transpired in the last couple weeks and the injunction that is leading to a lot of guys flocking to the college football practice field. Let's start with what actually happened, because it's been reported poorly, I feel like, across the entire board. A couple weeks back, end of July, beginning of August, a federal judge in Colorado certified a nationwide class citing that every Division I athlete who started playing in 2022/2023 season, they have now finished their 4 years of eligibility this spring, and they blocked the NCAA from enforcing its eligibility rules against them. Remember, we just got the 5 to play 5 ruling. This was not that long ago. It's all agreed upon. The NCAA has adopted it. So what they're trying to do is say that the guys that signed up to play in 2022, well, this would be their 5th year. And while they've played 4, now they get that 5th. So they're essentially trying to back their way into playing a little more college football. So in plain English, an entire graduating class of college athletes just all of a sudden magically got another year of eligibility. Now, the NCAA asked the judge to kind of pause her own ruling while it was appealed, and she said no. And her reasoning was pretty blunt. The NCAA was essentially rehashing arguments it had already made and that she had already rejected. So it's now gone to the Circuit Court of Appeals, which is where it sits right now. Now, this is the part that explains every roster decision that's going to be made here for the teams that we'll talk about today. Nobody really knows if this is going to hold. There is a thing that the NCAA rule book has inside of it, and it's called the rule of restitution. And what it says is roughly this: if a player competes while an injunction is in effect and that injunction later gets thrown out, the NCAA can come back and vacate your wins. Interesting, right? Could strip a championship. You could potentially demand a reimbursement of television revenue. Whatever it might be. They could declare you ineligible for the postseason retroactively. Now, remember, the NCAA doesn't have a ton of power over college football because they don't run college football's postseason. That's run by the college football playoff. So the NCAA doesn't necessarily have jurisdiction there. But still, there are teams that are operating in the cautious way. So if you decide to play a guy that the judge told you that you could play, and there's precedent, and everybody in this building knows, we saw it last year in college basketball, right? Charles Bediako for Alabama got a temporary restraining order, played in 5 or 6 games, and then the judge denied the preliminary injunction. 5 games and it was over. So you put yourself in a head coach's chair or an athletic director's chair, and a court says that you can play this young man, and the governing body says that if we win on an appeal, then we may take your season away for having played that young man. So here's how a handful of programs in tonight's show are answering that question. Notre Dame, for example, they looked at the possibility and said, no, thank you. We just can't do this. We don't feel comfortable doing this. Junior Tuihalamaka is not in the building. Meanwhile, Indiana looked at the exact same math, and they said, you know what, Stephen Daly, Kellen Wyatt, you guys can come back. Come on back. The defending national champion said, we're going to take advantage of this rule. We're going to bring these guys back. Georgia has openly said that they are, Kirby was asked directly about it, they're always open to bringing in new players if they have room. Sounds like LSU is shopping around as well. Sounds like they might be in pursuit of some depth at running back. There's buzz about that. They might be in pursuit of some more depth, maybe at corner, maybe at wide receiver. And Lane Kiffin, he kind of raised the objection that nobody else bothered to raise. How is a man supposed to learn your system in 2 weeks? I don't know the answer to that at all. We also know that Texas is sitting there potentially taking advantage of this as well. So here's one person that is kind of at the middle of all of this, and his situation is unique, and it's Thomas Castellanos, who went undrafted through all 7 rounds. Remember, he played last year quarterback at Florida State. Well, the injunction handed him a 5th year of college eligibility right now, except the transfer portal window for players that covered by that ruling was open for just a week, from August 3rd to August 10th. So he's currently suing for the right to enter the portal that is already shut. Now, he's open to coming back as either a quarterback or maybe as a wide receiver. After all, he went to multiple mini camps in the NFL as a wide receiver. And if you listen to coaches that have described what's going on here in the last month, they've described it in a really, really interesting way. They've called it a cluster. They said that it's almost like everyone in the building is trying to assemble a plane at 30,000 feet. And then people that have covered this actually went one step further. It's like assembling a plane at 30,000 feet while the plane's actually on fire. So here's the other side of this, and that I don't think a lot of people want to talk about, because everyone's all for, hey, these guys, this rule wasn't fair to these guys that are now going and trying to get 1 year back and all this other stuff. Rosters are capped at 105, right? We know that. And that number does not move because a judge decided to sign some type of injunction. So for every 23-year-old that comes back and takes a roster spot, there could be an 18-year-old guy that has never played a down that's trying to make a college roster. And the players who win here might be the ones with 4 years of production and real college level highlights. And the players who lose are the ones that nobody knows just yet. It might be a future player, but it might be a walk-on. It might be a guy that's trying to earn his way, but hasn't yet had the chance to. And their chance might evaporate because one guy had a ruling in his favor and decides to come back. So the NCAA's own argument isn't nothing. When these kids enrolled, the deal was 5 years to play 4. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew the rules. Now, I don't know exactly what the 10th Circuit is going to say about the rules. Nobody really does right now. What I do know is that a lot of programs across the country are looking at this injunction and they are coming to a bunch of different conclusions. Some are embracing the possibility of a 5th year. Some are actively saying, no, it's not worth it. Not if something down the road by way of restitution could strip us from what we've earned this season. So, fascinating time in college sports. Keep it locked in on some of these 5th year players, because right now, guys that aren't in camp can actively go back. Well, what about the guys that get cut here in final cuts from the NFL? Are they coming back too? It'll be very interesting to watch here over the next couple weeks. Now it's time to dive into some of our camp whispers, and these have been really fun. These have been really fun to kind of go behind the scenes, talk to sources, dial into what's going on in training camp for some of the hopefuls this season. We will start today with the Indiana Hoosiers. They're the champs. The first thing that I'm hearing right now out of Bloomington is that Indiana is playing this ruling very aggressively, right? And a lot of people have weighed in on this. And the story behind it's interesting, right? Stephen Daly tore his knee celebrating in the Big Ten championship game. So think about that for a second. You beat Ohio State in remarkable fashion, 13-10, great defensive performance. You're on the field, the confetti is falling down, you win the Big Ten title, and his college career ends in the middle of what might have been the best night of his life, right? He led the Big Ten with 19 tackles for loss. That was top 3 in college football. He had 5.5 sacks, and he had to sit on the sidelines while his team won the national championship. Well, 4 days after that ruling came down in Colorado, he was back at practice. And Curt Cignetti, on where he is right now, is that he's got a bit of a modified program. He's dressing out. He's got a lot of individual work, not necessarily a ton of 11 on 11 just yet. But will Daly be ready for North Texas on September 5th? Curt Cignetti said, I haven't even thought about that just yet. But he's out there, and they went and got Kellen Wyatt back too. So 2 players, 1 court order, allowing both those players an additional year of eligibility. And this is a great D-line, right? The other thing we're hearing out of Indiana camp right now is that Josh Hoover has addressed the exact thing that everyone was all concerned about when he signed at Indiana. And this is one that you could check, which is why I really like it. In week 1 of camp, a bunch of different outlets watched Hoover and kind of said the exact same thing. The ball comes out beautifully. We know that, right? Tight spiral, really good placement, really almost robotic mechanics because it's so repeatable. But the timing with the new receivers, it wasn't there early in camp. Miss a couple balls here, a deep ball there, a big miss to Charlie Becker on a shallow cross. So a bunch of people, that was the assessment after week 1. Well, here's where things are acknowledging there's been noticeable progress as they've moved to the midway point of camp. Sounds like he's got a great understanding of the offense. He looks like he's more comfortable in the pocket. He's displaying a lot of leadership, which takes time to develop. And the timing on the routes with the wideouts right now sounds like far more precise as everything started to go on. So that was something that people flagged. Now it's being praised. So the growth has been described by those in the program as quote unquote special. So the verdict on him overall is that, yeah, there have been some subtle mistakes. Nothing's necessarily been perfect from start to finish, but the progress has been notable to the point where people are saying he's looking about as comfortable as Fernando Mendoza did a year ago. Remember, Fernando Mendoza, he needed a couple games to kind of sync up with those pass catchers. And Hoover, by all accounts, he's at least on the same path, if not slightly ahead of the curve right now here in August. And the last thing coming out of Indiana's camp, and it's the one that could very well decide the season, there's exactly one group right now that there is a little bit of a question mark. And there is still right now an ongoing competition to figure out exactly what that group's going to look like. We know at one side on defense at corner will be Jamari Sharp. He apparently has looked terrific. There is a big void on the other side. Is where D'Angelo Ponce played last year. He was an All-American. And you have a couple guys that have had some good stretches going back to spring in A.J. Harris and Rylan Gandy, but both have been set back by minor injuries, and that's necessarily allowed for them to play a ton. So there's not really a ton of options, right? You have a couple other guys that might need another year before they're capable of being a legitimate dude on the outside. Because when you're replacing an All-American like you're replacing a D'Angelo Ponce, the two guys trying to replace him have been dealing with some occasional hurdles from a health standpoint. So what does this mean? It means that Indiana is going to be playing some great teams this year, some really good weapons that they'll have to cover in the back end. Everything else on the roster looks really good. Quarterback looks good. Wideout looks good. Feel great about the running backs, hearing a lot of buzz about those guys. You know the D-line is going to be great with all the existing talent that's coming back. But if for whatever reason they have a hole at one specific corner spot, that is a problem. Now, there's things you can do. Maybe you roll the safety over. You kind of pull a guy and just cover and support that side of the ball. That's something you could do. Maybe you have to ask the defensive line to get home with 4, so you're not blitzing, and maybe they're not as aggressive as they were in the front 7 last year, because you don't want that corner to have to cover for more than 3 seconds on an island by himself, which is why Stephen Daly and Kellen Wyatt matter more than they might look. It's not necessarily a luxury addition to a really deep room. It's a really quality insurance on one hole that they might not be able to fill, and that's the cover spot opposite Sharp. So the reason why Indiana is going to get through September and October, we know the quarterback's going to be good. They're going to be just fine. But when things start to ramp up as far as difficulty with some of the offenses they'll have to face off against, they're going to need all hands on deck in the back end. And right now, one of those spots is very much up for grabs. Moving on to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And the first thing we're hearing out of South Bend is something that we're very interested in, is the junior Tuihalamaka aspect. Like, he isn't practicing, isn't in the building, and the reason is institutional caution, not football. They're concerned about the restitution rule, and I understand the decision. I also think that having more guys along the defensive line would be great. The more the merrier along the defensive front, and Tuihalamaka in the past has been a very impactful player. The second thing I'm hearing right now that not a lot of people are talking about is that one of the few schools in the sport where it sounds like the offense and the defense are pretty even. Now, I've read every program, all their notes, all their scrimmage stats, everything that's available to me. And this is one of the only places where it's like, yep, the offense has a day, the defense has a day. The offense has a day, the defense has a day. So everywhere else, you get the same sentence. It's that the defense is way ahead of the offense at this point. You hear that at Georgia, at Texas, at LSU, at Penn State. It's kind of a standard August observation. And we've talked about why just a couple shows ago. Notre Dame is apparently the exception. Some people will say the defense will have a better day, and then the offense will retaliate. And the average out over the course of all their practices up to this point is a stalemate. Not like one side has the edge over the other, which should be very, very exciting to hear if you are a fan of the Irish. You should be over the moon by this news, because it means the offense, with arguably a Heisman favorite at quarterback, is holding even against maybe the best defense it will see all season. I mean, we know CJ Carr is going to be great this year. He had 4-to-1 touchdown interception ratio last year, 66% completion. And a lot of people are talking about his advancement, how comfortable he's with these new receivers. Sounds like Greathouse is bouncing back. There's a lot of things to like about what you're hearing from Notre Dame. And if they can move it consistently against this group, I feel pretty good about what this Notre Dame offense might be able to tell you. Now, we are also factoring in what's going on behind CJ Carr, right? Because we've talked a little bit about maybe the lack of depth at quarterback. Well, it sounds like there's some progress being made in the backup quarterback room right now. So we'll see exactly what's going to happen, because there are a handful of freshmen. And right now, Blake Herbert is missed a couple practices, tending to a personal matter too. So that backup quarterback competition is very much up in the air. But by all accounts, the starters right now for Notre Dame are playing at a really high level. Now, what I've also heard is the name Matt Jeffrey, who did miss spring football because he's playing lacrosse. Haven't we heard that somewhere before when it comes to Notre Dame wide receivers? That's right. Oh, yeah, Faison, who might be their best receiver, or at least has been one of their most explosive receivers the last couple of years. Well, sounds like Matt Jeffrey's finding his way in the rotation already. So another lacrosse player that is helping out the Irish in their receiver core. The last thing coming out of Notre Dame right now is that you are hearing over and over again a lot of rave reviews from this defensive line. Like, we are not surprised by this, by the way. We had them one of the top D lines in the country when we went back and evaluated them just a few months ago. We know Bryce Young has always had the potential. Well, now it's sounding like he's beginning to emerge. And people are saying that his pass rush ability has gone up exponentially. That's opposite Boubacar Traore, who's been a dominant force in fall camp. And then you're also hearing the name Keon Keeley, who transferred up from Alabama. He's going to be a solid contributor. I don't think he's going to be a take over the game guy, but sounds like you might have 2 take over the game guys right in front of him. So that entire sentence is Notre Dame's ceiling, right? How good can Notre Dame's pass rush be without blitzing? Because if you look at what Notre Dame was the last couple of years, like they were a heavy blitz team. They were an aggressive group. Well, if they don't have to be, because you can get home with 4, think about how much harder it's going to be to throw on the Irish, knowing how good that secondary is. So for every elite quarterback in the sport, if you can't, it doesn't matter how good you are. If they can get home with 4, your 3 or 4 wideouts against their 7 defenders in coverage, that's bad math. So you don't have to send 5. You can just leave your corners out there with safety help over the top. And then when you talk to Notre Dame's players and you ask, how do you slow down a quarterback that can layer throws? And he said, well, the only way you can do that is by getting pressure. Well, a team with a quarterback that can't block is going to have a really hard time against this secondary. I can assure you that. And remember, Notre Dame's offense has been playing really well. So if they can get home with 4 and they're fired up with their D-line, imagine what that says about the team overall. So let's spin it forward a little bit. The 4-man rush could very easily change how Notre Dame plays defense in the first part of the season. And September is the entire reason why this program was left out last year. They didn't start fast, right? They started 0-2 last year and missed the playoff because of it. But if Young and Traore, they can win those one-on-ones, then Chris Ash doesn't have to blitz when they're at Lambeau Field, which means you keep 7 in coverage instead of 6, and that elite secondary gets to play the way that you want them to play. And that's how a team, it becomes completely locked down across the board. And also raises the stakes on the decision they made about the injunction too. Because Notre Dame is now beginning to realize, man, those 2 defensive ends staying healthy with Keon Keeley as an adequate third guy means you can pass on a guy like Tui Alamaka. Right now, it's not necessary. It's not worth the risk. So if either goes down, that could be a problem in October or November. But either way, this is a national title roster right now. And by all accounts, their performance in fall camp is living up to the billing. The Ole Miss Rebels won 13 games last year. That was the most in program history. They went to the college football playoff semifinal. We know LSU took Lane Kiffin. We know a bunch of assistants with them, including the offensive coordinator. You look at Pete Golding, though, I think he's pressed the right buttons. He has pressed the right buttons since he took over at the beginning of the playoff last year. And now those buttons being pressed are carrying over into what's been a very impressive fall camp. Now, the first thing we're hearing out of Oxford is that the most interesting man in the program right now is actually the backup quarterback. Well, stop me if you've heard that before, right? Everyone loves the backup, but this one in particular is unique, and I will explain why here in just a minute. But this is Deuce Knight. He transfers from from Auburn to Ole Miss. They scrimmaged Saturday, and it was closed to everybody. No public access, no media access. Turned out Chambliss played 1 series, and then they handed the offense to Deuce Knight, and he ran with it. And the verdict from people that watched it closely is that Deuce Knight was the star of the show, without a doubt. And that's interesting because if you watch what Deuce Knight was back in April, if you listen to people talking about his spring performance, he had a tough time going through the progressions. You could tell he was going to take the snap, throw it to the first receiver. It didn't matter if he was open or not. And if that first guy wasn't off, he was going to take off and go make a play. And against pressure, he was maybe a little bit tentative about where the ball was supposed to go. Well, here's where he was on Saturday. He was spot on. He got it to the hot receiver when they decided to blitz. When they got in his face, he knew and had a plan where to go with it. He worked through his progressions. He was really good on deep balls. It sounds like he's a completely different player. And a lot of people are giving the credit to Joe Judge, the quarterback's coach. And he's going to be a problem in his own right? He's 6'5". He's 225 pounds. You mix in a quarterback draw with a guy that's that size who can run. That's a real weapon. So why does the backup quarterback matter this much? Why have we spent the last couple minutes talking about the backup quarterback at Ole Miss? Well, Chambliss was the backup quarterback last year. Having an insurance policy at that position is significant because Chambliss right now, he is the straw that stirs the drink in Oxford, Mississippi. We know that, right? And Ole Miss, just found out in scrimmage number 1 that if, God forbid, something happened to Trinidad Shambliss, they'd be okay. Like they have a guy that can come off the bench. If Trinidad needs a rest or needs a sip of Gatorade, the guy that come off the bench and give him good reps, which is a really valuable thing that might pay dividends for any program in college football nowadays. Having 2 is extremely valuable. The other thing I'm hearing right now, and you don't hear it often, but it sounds like the offense has been slightly ahead of the defense at Ole Miss, which is unique. You don't hear that very much because if you look at the conditions, the defense, by all accounts, controlled most of camp prior to their first scrimmage last weekend. Sound like Kewan Lacey and others they weren't all going. You also didn't have necessarily some starters on defense. We're down like Centurion Perkins and Cam Franklin and Will Eccles. They didn't play very much as well. And the running game was essentially some type of variation of two-hand touch. So it wasn't full contact. And the offense winning a scrimmage in that type of setting is understandable, especially when the defense isn't permitted to tackle and without most of the front seven's best players and the backfield missing a starter or 2. So it's not necessarily a criticism of Ole Miss defense, just how camp works. So it's a little bit of a warning label about what a scrimmage result actually is. And we're going to see it a bunch throughout camp. So those that are saying, well, what's wrong with the defense at Ole Miss? Just don't worry about it. The defense has actually been ahead of the offense in the first 8 or 9 practices. It was just the scrimmage where the offense got the better end of the performance. The last thing out of Ole Miss, and it might be one of my favorite observations, and it's about their center on Bryson Sanders from the same former player that had been watching this closely. Sounds like the snaps were all good. No high snaps, no low snaps. Nobody had to go chase the ball. And you think that's simple? You think that's something that should be taken for granted? And it's not always simple when you got a head-up defender right on the center. I mean, the whole position is evaluated by the absence of a problem. And the guy that watched him watched something that the rest of us didn't necessarily pay attention to. A couple more that held up too. Sound like Caleb Cunningham got into the teamwork, caught a touchdown pass. Sounds like Carius Kern took some reps at right tackle and did a pretty good job. And that's a young man who spent much of the summer kind of working out, and sounds like someone kind of got in his ear and has challenged that group. And on defense, there's one name that continues to stand out, and that's Keaton Thomas. He's in from Baylor. It sounds like he's the real deal. Apparently, this guy is making plays all over the field. Now, here's what this all adds up to. You have a real backup quarterback that might change how Pete Golding and John David Baker, their offensive coordinator, coached this season. When your only functional quarterback is the entire offense, you want to protect him, right? You're not going to run Trinidad Shambliss in the red zone because you got to protect him. You take quarterback draw off the call sheet. You take quarterback sweep off the call sheet. You get him down. You say, don't fight for extra yards. Well, when you got a sophomore that is playing at a high level behind you, you just go and let Trinidad Shambliss play. That's not necessarily a depth chart note. That's a play calling decision that might pay dividends every single Saturday. But the scrimmage told us what we also don't know, is because you can't necessarily evaluate a defense and a run game based on two-hand touch. So the second scrimmage will be the real one. We'll find out exactly what the offense looks like with Kewan Lacey and whether or not you have to move a defender off of it. Because we know Ole Miss can score. What we have to now find out in the next 10 days is how good they are in the front seven defensively, and if that run game will be as good as it was a year ago. The LSU Tigers. And I want to go through a number that helps explain why LSU hired Lane Kiffin. Against 12 FBS opponents last year, LSU did not score more than 25 points at all, not once in 12 games. So the first thing I'm hearing out of Baton Rouge is what they did in the first scrimmage. And the number that I want you to focus on is 170. That's how many plays they ran inside Tiger Stadium, closed to everybody. So they waited out the heat and practiced under the lights. Half of it was live tackling. And that sounds like a lot. It does. Because if you look at some teams, Georgia, Tennessee, they had a hard time evaluating the pass rush because the quarterback couldn't be hit. Tennessee, they can't see the quarterback mobility because both those guys are in red jerseys. Like Ole Miss ran scrimmages against two-hand touch, right? Well, LSU tackled for 85 plays. And Kiffin said he did this on purpose. Like they played for a long time, And it was really good to see. And they got a lot of information on their guys. And the staff was in the building well past 10 o'clock at night watching the tape. The second thing I'm hearing is that the result was maybe a little more complicated than the headline itself. And the first defense played extremely well. Sounds like they put a lot of pressure on the offense. Sounds like they were really good in coverage, which that's the third head coach this week to say that at any time in scrimmage, both sides are never going to look really good. The first offense struggled for a little while and then came back. And as the scrimmage went along, they played really well. So it isn't necessarily that the defense won. It's the defense won early and the offense started to take over and play a little better late. Now, the offense moved the ball pretty well, moved it quickly. The defense bent and didn't break in the red zone. Sound like they forced a turnover or two. It turned a couple of those turnovers into points. And the best detail is that we're talking to each other all night, right? Multiple sources have kind of circled the same thing. There was a lot of jawing back and forth between the offense and defense. And it was good-natured. It was spirited. But here's the mechanism, is that it started with the leaders on each side of the ball. And once the veterans started talking, everyone else felt free to. And that's significant. Now, why? Because they brought in 41 transfers. Like, the biggest question about LSU this year is not about talent. It's about culture. It's about connectivity. And if there's jawing on both sides, it means you're taking real pride in what your group is doing offensively. And the defense is taking pride in what they're doing defensively, and it's competitive. Like, they care. So leadership can be a chain reaction, and it can be observed instead of claimed. And I think that's really, really important. So more than most, hearing some friendly, good-natured jawing going on during the scrimmage is a real win for LSU in first year of Lane Kiffin's tenure. The last thing coming out of LSU is surprised a lot of people that I think people are surprised that the freshmen up front are kind of the story right now. And a lot of people are wondering about the D-line. And you kind of expected to hear about some edge rushers, some veterans that people have been kind of dialed in too. Well, it sounds like the guys that everyone's really excited about are some of the young guys, whether it's Deuce Geralds or Richard Anderson, Lamar Brown in his first fall camp. Sounds like those guys are catching on really quickly. So that's 3 freshmen that got named before just about everybody else. So 2 things that are also worth noting as well is that Sam Levitt is healthy. He has had a foot injury that required some surgery, missed spring. And Kiffin's line about him is that you wouldn't even know there was an injury. So that's really good news. You also look at the secondary too, and they didn't blink. You're hearing a lot of really good things about the cornerback spot with DJ Pickett on one side, PJ Woodland on the other. Sounds like those guys are doing a really good job as well. Now, there are some question marks about the quality that they might have at running back. That's a legitimate question. That's something worth watching going forward. There's maybe a question about the explosiveness of the wide receiver spot. They think they have quality wideouts, but they have a guy that could go for 150 or create a 70-yard touchdown by getting behind the defense. That's a question as well. But everything looks pretty good right now for LSU. And what does this mean when you get to September? It means that LSU, shockingly, might be a little bit of a defense-first football team. It might be a defense-first football team. That's okay. That should be fine with that. You look at that sequence again, right? The first defense played really, really well. The first offense struggled before coming back late. Now, it's not a bad scrimmage. That's a bit of a preview. A brand new offense with a quarterback coming off foot surgery, exactly 1 returning wide receiver. It might be a little uneven in September. So the question against Clemson or against Ole Miss in week 3 is whether those freshmen up front defensively can buy enough possessions for that offense to kind of find themselves maybe in the second half of the game. It was exactly what happened on Saturday night. And the running back rotation and the wide receivers and their upside, that's all worth watching as they move forward into their second scrimmage. So we'll see. It sounds like things are going very well for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss here early in fall camp. Moving on to the Georgia Bulldogs. And the first thing everyone's reacting to right now is in Athens is that maybe Georgia's receivers haven't been playing very well. And that's kind of been a bit of a buzz. It's been something we'd be concerned about. They scrimmaged on Saturday in Sanford Stadium, the first of 2 scrimmages before they kicked things off. Sounds like there were a bunch of drops. Sounds like the group consistently struggled to separate from the DBs they were going against. And I think that this is something worth noting, right? Now, what this could be is it's a ringing endorsement for what Georgia has in the back end defensively. That's, after all, that is the unit that these receivers, it might be one of the best units they faced all year. I mean, this secondary for Georgia is the real deal, right? So maybe it's just they're that good on defense, but there's also a little bit of a question mark too. We've been wondering for a while about Georgia's wideouts, right? We've been wondering about that. And if the receivers struggled, yeah, maybe it means the secondary's elite. That's absolutely possible. But it also means that maybe that group, that young receiver group, needs to take a step. And just because they didn't shine doesn't mean they can't shine in the future, because we know this group's talented, but it is arguably the biggest question mark on the team. It's a talented group without a lot of big game experience up and down the depth chart. So the second scrimmage, that'll be the test as to how they respond. The other thing I'm hearing is that 2 days after that first scrimmage, at the very next practice, the offense had maybe their best day of fall camp. Sound like Gunnar Stockton and Ryan Puglisi, both quarterbacks, had excellent days. I've heard this name multiple times. Landon Rolden with a couple long catches in team periods. I'm also hearing a lot about the tight ends as well. Ethan Barber, sounds like he had a great catch to end practice. Sounds like Gunnar himself had an unbelievable day. So while they did drop a couple balls on Saturday, the plays sounded like they were made on Monday. Same players, 2 different practices, completely opposite conclusions. So, which is why you got to hold those August scrimmage notes loosely. And yes, it was a slightly shorter session and shoulder pads, not necessarily a full scrimmage. So it's a little easier on the offense, but it's real work, and it isn't necessarily Saturday, but progress and response, I think, is very, very important. So bad day Saturday, great day Monday, that's a great response. That, to me, is progress. The other thing about Georgia, and it is a bit of a question on the defense, is that the pass rush, right? That was the big question mark throughout the offseason. How is the pass rush going to re-emphasize its focal point for Georgia this year? It was a disappointing part of the team last year. So far, the early answer is very encouraging. People are saying that the pass rush pressured Gunnar Stockton on third down packages, on regular down and distance situations. The offensive line held its own, as you'd expect from a group that's that talented, and yet the rush still was able to get home from time to time. But here's the limit. It's the same one over and over again. The next step is actually getting the quarterback to the ground. And because Georgia avoided contact in the scrimmage for safety reasons, we don't necessarily know about the sacks just yet. So the pressure is somewhat measurable in August, but the sacks are not. One more thing worth having is that the safety picture got a little bit more crowded. And that's a really good thing, because we know that KJ Bolden, he's the established starter. He's an All-American contender. But the competition for the spot off of him added a third guy. And it sounds like Kyron Jones made sure that he would not be forgotten, had a couple big hits, including one that knocked the helmet off of one of his running backs. So spinning it forward now, the wide receiver room, they got to grow up a lot in the next couple weeks. And somebody has to become the guy. I think that guy is probably going to be Isaiah Canyon, the transfer from Georgia Tech. I do think he's going to develop into a very dependable guy. But remember what the program's number one goal was heading into this year. That was to be more explosive in the passing game. Well, the only way you can do that is if these receivers become a little bit more consistent and they avoid those drop balls that plagued them on Saturday, and they play a little bit more like the group that took the field on Monday and played at a really high level, which is, by the way, the definition of a young room. You're going to have some really high highs. You're going to have some really low lows. It's the way it goes. Super talented, but talent doesn't guarantee that you're going to make the play on 3rd and 8 in November when you're in a gotta-have-it situation. But Landon Rolden, Ethan Barber, the tight ends, it sounds like, are going to be a big part of what this offense utilizes in the passing attack. So even though they might not have crazy depth, crazy consistency at wide receiver, it might not matter as much to Georgia as it does to some other programs. Because if you hear and listen to Kirby Smart, you listen to others that have been watching this program closely, sounds like the tight ends have a chance to be the best group in America. So they're blocking on the perimeter, and if you can block on the perimeter, it opens things up for play action. Sounds like Caden Prothro spent some time at receiver, now learning tight end. So the staff is quietly building a version of the offense that doesn't necessarily need a number one take over the game wide receiver. They're going to be just fine. And the pass rush question, it won't get answered until September because you can't evaluate whether or not they can finish when no one's allowed to drop the quarterback in practice. But I remain optimistic about the progress that they've made this offseason in affecting the opposite passer. The Texas Longhorns, and the first thing out of Austin, is a bit of a tough one. So want to kind of handle it plainly. All right, Trevor Goosby left Monday's practice with what's been reported as an apparent knee injury. He is the starting left tackle, and the severity at the time was unknown. So he was scheduled for testing on Tuesday morning. And by all accounts, that testing has come back very positively. According to ESPN's Pete Thamel, sounds like it's a bone bruise, which I don't know how long it's going to take for him to return, how long it will take for that to heal, but that is good news. So that is significant. And if you listen to Steve Sarkisian and you ask him whether he has concerns about anybody missing the opener, no, he says he feels pretty good right now. And then that happened, right? But here's the part that's interesting. Texas spent the entire offseason trying to build offensive line depth, right? So that one injury wouldn't derail who they were. They brought in a bunch of offensive linemen that are multiple years into the program, a handful that were brought in for this season. And the answer, if they ever needed it, was that they probably have a couple guys that could step up. God forbid something happened to one of their guys. So it almost did. Thank goodness that things look okay for Goosby right now, because that's the biggest question mark for Texas is the offensive line. They got skill talent, love their quarterback. I think they've improved it at running back for sure. I also love all three levels of what they're doing defensively. But if the offensive line underachieves like it did through most of the first 7 or 8 games of the season, that could limit Texas's potential in some of those difficult games. And after all, it is one of the toughest schedules in America this upcoming year. The other thing you're hearing about is a flu outbreak that kind of went through the program, and a bunch of players missed practice on Saturday. Most were back Monday after an off day. And Sarkisian, he said the name that it hurt the most, and that was the linebacker room. And Anthony Smith, who had his best practice before he got sick, is that he was maybe going to lose some weight or some things like this, right? So understand what the scrimmage actually was. It was a defense missing several players and a bunch of guys because of an illness. So that's not the defense that will tee it up against Ohio State in week number 2. So trying to get healthy, trying to get guys back as soon as humanly possible will be of the utmost importance for the Longhorns. The last thing coming out of Texas, and Sark explained that the scrimmage, this was the sequence. On the first couple plays, Hollywood Smothers got out on a run, and Jonah Williams made a really good open field tackle downfield. Right, a few plays later, Raleigh Brown got in the open field, and Kobe Black made a really good tackle. And here's what Sark said when watching those plays. And from a head coach's perspective, and I'm watching that's a win for Texas, right? Like 2 great backs in the open field. They get tackled, and man, that's great by our defense, right? But given the fact that Steve Sarkisian is also the offensive play caller, looking at it from the OC's perspective, he would expect Hollywood Smothers and Raleigh Brown to make those guys miss. So that's the whole thing, right? Every scrimmage result is good news and bad news all at the same time. And the man in charge has to hold on to both. So did it get anything settled? I don't know. I mean, I don't think it necessarily secured a position, but I do think that it is encouraging that 2 super dynamic playmakers who we know, Raleigh Brown and Hollywood Smothers, the Texas defense has been able to handle them and contain them at times throughout fall camp. That is a positive. You're also hearing a lot about a baseball player, and that's Jonah Williams, who needed a shoulder surgery, and the football staff and the baseball staff and Jonah and his family decided to do it when they did, which sacrificed the rest of his baseball season this past season. Well, Sark said anytime you have a shoulder surgery, you got to be wondering, all right, can this guy tackle and be physical the way that you need to be in order to play? And early on, maybe they felt some of that. Well, Saturday, it sounded like he was putting a lot of people on the ground. He also had an interception too. So he's got a lot of range at safety because he's an outfielder, right? He can track the ball. And the pick apparently was a very instinctual play. And the ball skills and the natural timing of him being able to address the ball is massive. So as a guy that gave up half his baseball season so that his shoulder would be ready for fall camp, well, sounds like he's making a lot of big football plays as well. So where does this leave Texas? It leaves him with a couple questions right now that are still up in the air. And we got to watch Goosby. How quickly will he get back on the practice field? And Jordan Coleman, he becomes one of the most important second-year players on the roster because the entire offseason was about making sure they adequately addressed the depth and inconsistencies of the offensive line. They built that depth on purpose. So it's the exact scenario where they built it for. And you find out whether depth is real or just a talking point when a guy goes down, has to miss a little time. Now, the other question is the defense, and nobody really knows anything just yet. It sounds like the front seven that got evaluated in the scrimmage was missing a bunch of guys and a bunch of really impactful players. So Texas has one more real evaluation window before the opener, and it needs to happen when everybody's out there on the field. But the good news is the back end is in a really good spot. You got safeties, you got corners. Sounds like that group's coming together very, very well. So everything is in front of Texas here at the moment. And with the good news coming from Trevor Goosby that it's just a bone bruise and not something more significant, hopefully that offensive line can continue to gel so it does not plague them like it did early in the season last year. The Miami Hurricanes played for a national championship in January. They lost that game close to Indiana, right? And the first thing you're hearing out of Coral Gables is they went back to the same building for the scrimmage, right? Not at their practice facility. They wanted to go to Hard Rock. And Cristobal called it a back and forth battle. Sounded like explosive plays went both ways. There were stretches when the defense answered with pressure and with physical stops, and they came out clean on injuries. But here's the thing that's very interesting. Miami ran more than 30 special teams plays in one scrimmage. Kickers got tested from multiple distances in the red zone. They also had some 2-minute situations, and the specialists played really well. So for a team that lost the national championship by 6 points, that's not filler, right? The second thing I'm hearing is that a question that anybody's had about the offensive line finally got answered. Everybody knows two things at Miami, right? Like we know that Samson Okunla looked like a lock at left tackle, and that Jackson Cantwell, who was projected nationally as a left tackle, has been working at guard. Well, nobody would necessarily connect them, and someone finally did, right? I'd be shocked if Samson was not the left tackle. He looks really, really good, which means that Cantwell can slide inside. So Okunla is the reason why Cantwell can move. And that room can go 9 deep. And it sounds like they're cross-training all of it along the offensive line, and that's a philosophy worth using. And this is the time to do it. Because contingencies, when someone goes down, you have someone ready. And you're going to be able to get your best 5, your best 6, your best 7 on the field. And that's the exact thing that makes Miami a star last year, was the quality of the play along their offensive line. So Miami is already in August getting themselves into a position where this offense can go deeper than the starting 5, which will be beneficial as they move throughout the season. The last thing, too, is that the tight ends can catch. However, right now for Miami, there's a question about how engaged they'll be in run game and blocking altogether. We know the catching part is not in question. If you listen to their personnel at tight end, sounds like Mueller is just kind of described as your prototypical tight end. Sounds like Lofton looks really good running and catching passes. It sounds like he's likely going to make a significant impact. But people are a little curious about who is going to be the extra blockers when it comes to short yardage. And it could very well end up being one of those deep offensive linemen, right? That's a checkable weakness inside of a group that everyone is praising right now. And it's the kind of thing that everyone really pays attention to maybe as it becomes a problem. They don't get out in front of it. Because in August, like, oh, yeah, it's great to catch passes, but what about 3rd and 1 in November? So that's something worth watching as well. And the one more is Damari Brown. He played 2 games in 24 and missed 3 of the last 4 in 2025, which means he's missed the national championship run. And he didn't feel like he was able to do what he wanted to do, which was unfortunate. So it's going to be interesting to watch him as he continues to progress. Now, here's what it all means come September. Now, the short yardage problem, will that show up against Stanford on a Friday night? I don't know. But Miami's got 2 weeks to find a solution. Because there's only 3 answers to not having a legitimate blocking tight end. You can put a 6th offensive lineman on the field, which tells the defense exactly what's coming in some cases. You could throw it on 3rd and 1, which I know Mario Cristobal doesn't want to do that. Or you find out in game that maybe neither is a real option right now. The good news is the roster is already built for that first option because the offensive line can go 9 deep, and they've cross-trained all of it. So they're already working on contingencies in the event someone goes down, or you need a jumbo tight end out there in the form of an offensive line. So they might need one of those contingencies that they didn't plan on. But it sounds like the special teams work is not a small item either. So you lose a close game, you lose a game where maybe a kick goes to the uprights, it changes the outcome. Well, a program with 30-plus kicking plays in one scrimmage clearly is putting an extra emphasis on the third phase of the game. I want to finish somewhere where not a lot of people are looking right now, and that's with the Nebraska Cornhuskers. But Nebraska has not won more than 7 games in 9 straight seasons. Matt Rhule's 500 in 3 years, right? 5 wins and 6 wins and 7 wins. And the first thing you're hearing out of Lincoln is that Matt Rhule believes that this is his best team, and the people around him are starting to agree. If you listen to people that have watched practice, people are saying this is definitely the best team that Matt Rhule has had. Now, the honest read on this is that no coach entering year 4 is ever going to say that it isn't. Yeah, this isn't my best roster. No one's going to say that, right? But people inside the program that they genuinely believe that this is the best roster top to bottom. Now, here's the counterweight. It might also be the most difficult schedule that Nebraska has faced since 2021, when they played 8 different teams that won 9 or more games. But the roster is there. Best roster of the era, probably the hardest schedule in the last 5 years. Those two facts arriving in the exact same August could define Nebraska's entire season. And it's why 7-6 this year could mean a much better football team than a 7-6 team from a year ago. The other thing we're hearing about is Dana Holgorsen, and that he physically could not contain himself when talking about the quarterback room. Said he raised both arms toward the sky in a fit of glee, right? His line that it's a healthy quarterback room. I mean, what other quarterback room in the country has 3 kids with Power 4 starting experience? That's his claim. I'll let him own it, but the room is real. You got Anthony Calandria. He's the starter, and nobody's pretending otherwise. And Holgorsen's words on Calandria is there's no need for tea leaves there. I mean, it's cut and dry. There's no need for an announcement. He was the Mountain West Player of the Year last year at UNLV, went for nearly 3,500 yards through the year and 23 touchdowns. Plus, he added 700 on the ground with 10 more scores. But behind him, you got TJ Lateef, who's a really good story, right? He had 7 games as a true freshman, had 4 starts. He's the 5th true freshman to start at quarterback for Nebraska since 1950. And the number that matters most for a freshman, he had 1 turnover across 7 games. So it sounds like they have depth at the quarterback spot, which is really valuable, especially knowing that Anthony Calandria is probably going to be asked to run the ball throughout the course of the season. But his playmaking ability, by all accounts, has been off the charts for the Cornhuskers this fall. The last thing coming out of Nebraska is what the scrambling quarterback costs his own teammates. And if you listen to Nebraska's receivers coach, Da'Keel Shorts, he got asked what it's like to play with Calandria. Now, everybody answers that question from the defensive side. But what does a scrambling quarterback do to coverage? Well, I want to look at it from a receiver's perspective, right? Everyone's saying that Anthony Calandria is electric. He's jittery. He's wiry. And from a receiver's point of view, the play is never dead. And then this. So if you're a receiver, for example, you have one route that you want to run. So you run your route. And if I don't get the ball, I need to run another route. So it's like running 2 routes, maybe even 3 routes in one play, just to continue to play on the move. And that's going to lead to a bunch of big plays. Now, that's the cost and the payoff of a mobile quarterback. Told from the side that no one really talks about. Like, what does it do to the receivers? So they scrimmaged on Saturday, 120 plays, came out unscathed, which is big. And Rhule's framing of the scrimmage is even for maybe one of the best things we've heard this month, is that who can make people miss when it's not thud? Who can run through contact and turn 3rd and 6 into a 1st and 10 when it looked like everything was done, right? So they're not necessarily trying to blitz or out-scheme each other. They just want to see who can block and tackle, which at the end of the day is the epitome of football. And 2 things can be true here. They've done a really nice job, apparently, through 9 practices. They've come a long way, but there is still a long way to go. So if you look at where things are for Nebraska, it sounds like the arrow is pointing up. So let me tell you what this all adds up to. Here's the stat that kind of frames it. Nebraska last year went 5-0 when they had more than 352 yards. They went 2-6 when they didn't get over that 352-yard mark. So for scale, averaging 352 a game would have them ranked 95th in the country. So they didn't need to be elite. They need to be average. If they can just get to the 60s or to the 50s as far as yards per game, they're going to win a lot of football games. So the play is now never going to be dead with Anthony Colandrea at the quarterback. You're going to run your route, then run a second route, then a third route. You're going to get open. You're going to make a big play. So that could be massive. Colandrea's legs are no longer a highlight feature for this team. They're part of the plan. And they matter more than they probably should because the running back room right now is relatively inexperienced. So the math is maybe a little simple, maybe a little uncomfortable. It's the best roster of the Rhule era. It's the hardest schedule in 5 years. And it's an offense that has to manufacture at least 350 a week with a quarterback that is always improvising. But if Colandrea can stay upright, they can clear that bar. And maybe this is the year for Nebraska. But if he doesn't, well, we've seen this movie before from the Cornhuskers, and they might underachieve at times throughout the season. All right, that's it. We got 8 programs. We got 1 court order. We've done Notre Dame. We've done Indiana, Ole Miss, LSU, Georgia, Texas, Miami, and Nebraska as well. And then somewhere in Denver, you got a bunch of judges that are reading briefs, deciding what the eligibility part of this whole equation holds up. So nobody in the sport really knows what it's going to say, but everyone's going to keep playing anyway. Keep an eye on it, though. It's worth watching. Maybe your team adds somebody here at the 11th hour that might help put you over the top to win a game or two that you were not expecting to win. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. We encourage you always to go and subscribe to the podcast. You can also check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. So for all of us here at ACF, from Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, intern Charlie, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.